I'm Olivia Johnson. I'm 28 years old. And at my own brother's engagement dinner, my family found out that the daughter they'd written off as a weird computer nerd was the secret CEO of a company that had just been acquired for $300 million. Before I tell you about the dead silence that fell over that fancy rooftop restaurant, about the look on my father's face when his world turned upside down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always humbling to see how far a story can travel. The whole thing happened at the Signature Room on the 95th floor of the John Hancock Building in Chicago. If you've ever been there, you know the view is breathtaking. The entire city sprawls out beneath you, a carpet of glittering lights that seems to stretch into infinity. It's the kind of place you take someone you want to impress, a place that screams, "We've made it." That night, my family had certainly made it. I was just along for the ride. I felt like a foreign object, a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor. My brother Michael, the golden child, was glowing at the head of the table. He was a newly minted resident at Northwestern Memorial, and he wore his success as easily as he wore his tailored suit. His arm was draped possessively around his fiancée, Sarah Parker, a woman who radiated a quiet and formidable intelligence. My parents, Dr. Robert Johnson and Victoria Johnson, Esquire, were seated on either side of them, holding court like the proud monarchs of a dynasty fulfilled. They were in their element. I, on the other hand, was relegated to the far end of the table, the distant colonial outpost of the family empire. My dinner companion was my great-aunt Margaret, a woman who communicated in a series of sighs and pronouncements about her failing health and prize-winning hydrangeas. "So, Olivia," she began, her voice a loud whisper that carried halfway down the table. She squinted at me over the top of her bifocals, a common practice that made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Your mother tells me you're still tinkering with those computers. Is it a full-time job now, or more of a hobby?" I gripped my water glass, forcing a smile that felt tight and unnatural. "Something like that, Aunt Margaret. I run a small tech company." "Oh, that's nice," she chirped, the same vacant enthusiasm she'd use if I told her I'd taken up macrame. "Is it? My neighbor's boy Kevin does that. He says it's quite steady. He just fixed my printer last week. A lovely boy." I just nodded and murmured, "That's great." It was always easier to agree with their version of me than to try and explain the reality. For my entire life, my family's perception of my work had been stubbornly frozen in time. In their minds, I was perpetually 15 years old, locked in my bedroom, surrounded by tangled wires and the glow of a monitor, playing computer games. They had no framework to comprehend what I had actually built. More importantly, they had no interest in creating one. That's when I noticed Sarah, my brother's brilliant fiancée, staring at me. She hadn't been part of Aunt Margaret's interrogation, but her eyes were locked on my face with an unnerving intensity. As a corporate lawyer at a prestigious downtown firm, she was usually the epitome of composure. But right now, she looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Her face was pale beneath her elegant makeup, her mouth slightly agape. She was looking at me, but I had the distinct feeling she was seeing someone else entirely. My father, oblivious, raised his champagne flute. His voice, conditioned by years of delivering keynote speeches at medical conferences, boomed across the table. And to Michael, for not only following in my footsteps in the medical field, but for having the impeccable judgment to bring a wonderful woman like Sarah into our family. Polite applause rippled through our section. He beamed. Then his eyes found me at the end of the table. A familiar condescending smirk played on his lips. "And to Olivia," he added as an afterthought, "who was still tinkering with those computers. But hey, every family needs an IT person to fix the Wi-Fi, right?" A wave of sycophantic laughter followed. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles prickling my skin, a familiar pain I had grown numb to. But the laughter died abruptly. It was extinguished by the soft clink of a fork being placed on a china plate. The sound was so small, yet in the sudden silence, it was as loud as a gunshot. It was Sarah. She had lowered her fork, and the look on her face was no longer just shock. It was dawning realization. She looked from my father to my brother, and then her eyes, wide with a mixture of disbelief and something else I couldn't quite read, landed back on me. "Wait a minute," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the air with the precision of a scalpel. "You're Olivia Johnson." My father chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. "Of course she is. That's my daughter. She just told you." Sarah shook her head slowly, her professional composure completely shattered. "No," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to suck all the air from the room. "You're the Olivia Johnson from TechVision AI." My father's smile faltered, confusion clouding his features. "Tech... what? Sarah, what are you talking about? It's some kind of inside joke?" I didn't answer. I just held Sarah's gaze. The secret I had guarded for years, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation, was about to be detonated. The bomb was armed. She took a deep, steadying breath, the lawyer in her reasserting control, preparing to present an undeniable piece of evidence. She looked directly at my father, her eyes clear and unwavering. "Dr. Johnson," she said, her voice now ringing with clarity and an edge of disbelief at her own words. "The tinkering with computers you just joked about, that's the company my firm, Urban Dynamics, just finalized the acquisition of 2 days ago." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle before delivering the final blow. "We bought TechVision AI for $300 million, dead utter silence." The world seemed to stop. The chatter from other tables, the clinking of glasses, the soft music from the lounge, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. There was only the stunned silence at our table, a vacuum of disbelief. My father's face, a face I had only ever seen project authority and unshakable confidence, was completely blank. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a gesture of pure, unadulterated shock. Michael just stared, his jaw slack, his head swiveling back and forth between me and his fiancé, as if he were watching a tennis match he couldn't comprehend. The footnote had just become the headline. The ghost had just materialized in the center of the room, and the story of how we got there was about to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light. To understand the depth of that silence, the sheer, earth-shattering gravity of it, you have to travel back with me. You have to understand what it feels like to be an anomaly in a family that prides itself on uniformity. You have to see the 1,000 tiny cuts that led to that one massive wound. My family is a Chicago dynasty built on 2 pillars, medicine and law. My father, Dr. Robert Johnson, is a neurosurgeon whose reputation is as sterling as the steel instruments he wields. He moves through the world with the unshakable certainty of a man who literally holds life and death in his hands. My mother, Victoria Johnson, is a partner at a law firm that occupies 3 floors of a skyscraper overlooking Lake Michigan. Her mind is a fortress of logic and precedent. Success to them was a clearly defined, non-negotiable path, an Ivy League education, a professional degree, a corner office, a country club membership. And then there was my brother, Michael. He wasn't just on the path, he was the path. Charming, athletic, and effortlessly brilliant in the ways that mattered to them. From the moment he could talk, he was destined to be Dr. Michael Johnson. He never disappointed them. He was their perfect reflection, their legacy assured. And then there was me. I wasn't a reflection. I was a distortion. I didn't want to dissect a frog. I wanted to deconstruct a motherboard. I didn't care for debate club. I cared for the elegant syntax of C++. While Michael was celebrated for scoring a goal in soccer, I was in my room teaching myself machine learning from online forums and open-source textbooks. My world was a universe of logic gates, neural networks, and the infinite possibility of a blank command line. To me, it was the most beautiful, powerful thing in the world. To them, it was a strange and slightly embarrassing deviation. The incidents blur together into a long montage of dismissal. There was the time I was 13 when my dad's brand new, top-of-the-line laptop, the one with all his research for a major conference, was completely bricked by a virus. He was apoplectic, a storm of fury in his mahogany-paneled study. My mom was on the phone, her voice strained, trying to find a 24-hour tech support service that would make a house call. I stood in the doorway. "I can fix it," I said quietly. My father turned on me, his face red with stress. "Olivia, for God's sake, get out of here. This is a $2,000 piece of equipment, not one of your little toys." "It's a polymorphic virus that's attached itself to the master boot record," I said, reciting what I diagnosed from a single glance at the error code. "The antivirus can't see it. You have to manually remove the partition and rebuild the boot sector from a command prompt." He stared at me, his anger momentarily replaced by bewilderment. "What in God's name are you talking about?" "Just let me try," I insisted. "What have you got to lose?" He sighed, defeated, and waved me toward the desk. For the next 20 minutes, a tense silence filled the room, punctuated only by the click-clack of the keys as my fingers flew across the keyboard. He and my mom stood behind me, watching as if I were performing some arcane ritual. And then it happened. The screen flickered. The corrupted error messages vanished. The familiar Windows startup chime filled the room. His desktop appeared, his presentation icon sitting right where he'd left it. I leaned back in the chair, a wave of pride washing over me. I had slayed the dragon. I looked up expecting, I don't know what, a thank you. A moment of awe. My father just cleared his throat, his composure restored. He nudged me out of the chair. Well, good. Now off to bed. You've spent enough time on that screen for one day. He never mentioned it again. But 2 weeks later, at a dinner party, he spent 10 minutes telling his colleagues a story about how Michael had cleverly talked his way out of a detention. My small miracle was an inconvenience that had been resolved. Michael's minor act of rebellion was a sign of future brilliance as a doctor. That was the family calculus. His wins were celebrated. My wins were simply expected. Or worse, ignored. It wasn't just neglect, it was an active campaign of discouragement. In my junior year, my computer science teacher, Ms. Rivera, a fiery, brilliant woman who was the first adult to ever speak my language, pushed me to enter a citywide programming competition. I designed a rudimentary AI that could learn and play chess. It wasn't perfect, but it was innovative. The night before the competition, my father sat me down. "Olivia," he said, his voice laced with that familiar tone of weary disappointment, "I spoke with your chemistry teacher today. A C+. That's not acceptable. I think you need to spend less time on these computer distractions and more time on your actual schoolwork, the subjects that will build a real future." "This is important to me, Dad," I argued. "What's important," he said, his voice hardening, "is getting into a good college. And this chess game of yours is not going to get you into a good college." I went to the competition anyway. I got second place. When I came home with the silver medal, my mother glanced at it and said, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Did you remember to take out the recycling?" The final, irrevocable break came in my senior year. I poured everything I had into a project for the Illinois State AI programming competition. It was an algorithm that could predict inventory needs for retail stores with 94% accuracy, a massive leap over existing commercial software. Ms. Rivera was ecstatic. "Olivia," she'd said, "this isn't a high school project. This is a business." The state finals were on a Saturday in May. It was the single most important event of my academic life. A week before, my mother made an announcement at dinner. "Great news! We're throwing a party for Michael. His early acceptance letter to the pre-med program at Northwestern just came in. We're so proud." My heart sank, but I forced a smile. "That's awesome, Mike. I'm really happy for you." Then I turned to my mom. "When's the party?" She beamed. "We're having it catered. All the relatives are coming. It's next Saturday afternoon. It's going to be a wonderful celebration of a real achievement." The phrase "real achievement" was a deliberate dart, and it found its mark. The air left my lungs. "Saturday. Mom, that's the day of my state finals. I told you about this. I put it on the kitchen calendar." She waved a dismissive hand, a gesture of pure, effortless invalidation. "Oh, Olivia, that computer thing. Honestly, in the grand scheme of things, is it really that important? Your brother has secured his future. That's what matters. Don't be selfish." Selfish. There was that word again. Wanting my own moment, my own small patch of sunlight, was selfish. So on that bright Saturday, while my family gathered in our manicured backyard to celebrate my brother, I took 2 buses to the University of Illinois campus alone. I sat in a large, quiet auditorium filled with the nervous energy of 100 other kids like me. I presented my project. I fielded questions from judges who were actual professors and industry professionals. They didn't see a hobby. They saw potential. And I won first place. They handed me a heavy gold-plated trophy and a check for $5,000. The applause echoed in the half-empty hall. As I walked off the stage, my heart was a strange mix of soaring pride and crushing loneliness. I instinctively scanned the audience for my family, a stupid, childish reflex. The seats were empty. I rode the bus home, the trophy a solid, comforting weight in my backpack. As I walked up the driveway, the sound of laughter and music washed over me. The party was in full swing. Michael was holding court, surrounded by adoring relatives. My parents were circulating, their faces flushed with pride. I walked into the kitchen, a ghost at my own brother's feast. I found my mom by the caterer's table. Mom, I said, holding out the trophy, I won. She glanced at it, her mind clearly elsewhere. Oh, that's wonderful, dear. A real trophy. Now, could you be a sweetheart and grab another bag of ice from the garage freezer? We're running low. I just stood there, speechless. I looked over at my father. He was in a deep conversation with my Uncle Jim, a man who worshipped my father and shared his views on everything. My father caught my eye for a second, gave a cursory nod toward the trophy, and then turned back to his conversation. Later that night, long after the last guest had departed and the house was quiet, I went looking for my trophy. I'd left it on the kitchen counter, a monument to my hollow victory. It wasn't there. I searched the dining room, the living room, nothing. A cold dread began to creep into my stomach. I walked into my father's home office, and there it was, sitting on his massive, leather-topped mahogany desk. Its proud golden form was being used as a paperweight. It was holding down a stack of medical journals, their titles proclaiming the importance of his world. My victory, my pride, the physical manifestation of my talent, was literally and figuratively buried under the weight of his success. I didn't confront him. I didn't yell. What was the point? The message was unambiguous. I quietly rescued my trophy, took it back to my room, and placed it in the back of my closet behind a stack of old sweaters. But the ultimate betrayal, the act that was not born of ignorance, but of calculated malice, was yet to come. I had applied to my dream schools, MIT, Stanford, Northwestern's engineering program. I had poured my heart into the applications. But as the spring wore on, only silence and thin rejection letters from my safety schools arrived. The disappointment was a physical ache. I started to believe it. I started to believe they were right all along. I was a failure. I resigned myself to my fate, a few years at the local community college, then maybe a job in IT support, just like they always predicted. The truth came out on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was helping my dad back up his old office computer, a task I'd done a dozen times. While running a diagnostic, I stumbled upon a password-protected folder deep in his user directory. It was labeled admin. My dad was clumsy with technology. He often used the same password for everything. Michael. I tried it. The folder opened. Inside was a subfolder labeled simply Olivia. My heart began to pound. I opened it. 3 PDF files. I clicked on the first. The MIT logo materialized on the screen. My eyes scanned the text, my brain struggling to process the words. It is my great pleasure to offer you a place, Dean's Merit Scholarship. My hands were shaking. I opened the next file. Stanford, accepted. The third, Northwestern Engineering. A full ride. They were all dated 2 months prior. They hadn't rejected me. They had wanted me. A frantic, desperate need for the whole truth seized me. I logged into his email account. Again. Michael Wendt. I went to the search bar and typed admissions@mit.edu. And there it was, the real acceptance email. And right next to it, an email filter. A simple, elegant, cruel rule. Any email from the admissions offices of those 3 universities was to be immediately marked as read and moved to a hidden archive folder. But they hadn't stopped there. In his drafts folder, I found their masterpieces, 3 perfectly crafted, formal-sounding rejection letters, one for each school. They had copied the official letterhead, mimicked the language, and in his sent folder, I saw that he had forwarded these forgeries to my email address. They hadn't just allowed me to believe I was a failure. They had meticulously constructed the illusion. They had built a prison of rejection around me and handed me the key, telling me it was the key to my own cell. I walked out of the study, the world tilting on its axis. I found them in the living room, reading the Sunday paper. I couldn't speak. I just held out my phone, displaying the screenshot of the real MIT acceptance letter. My mother looked at it, and her face held not a flicker of surprise. She just sighed, a long, weary sound of inconvenience. Olivia, we did what was best for you. We were protecting you from a world you aren't equipped to handle. Protecting me? My voice was a choked whisper. You destroyed my future because it didn't look like yours. You let me live for months believing I was worthless. My father lowered his paper, his face a mask of cold authority. We gave you every opportunity. We have invested everything in Michael's college fund. His future. A real, tangible future. We will not throw away good money on a computer science degree that will lead to a dead-end job. If you want to pursue this fantasy against our judgment, you can do it on your own dime. The words echoed in the silent room. It was an ultimatum, an act of divorce. He was severing me from the family, from my own history. In that moment, the part of me that had spent 18 years craving their approval, that had twisted itself into knots, trying to win a single scrap of their pride, simply died. It was a quiet, painless death. And in the void it left behind, something new took root, something hard and cold and clear. I turned and walked back to my room without another word. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt a profound, liberating clarity. He was right. I would do it on my own dime, and I would spend the rest of my life proving them wrong. The next 2 years were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. The line between day and night blurred into one long, continuous grind. We officially founded Tech Vision AI. Our world headquarters was Ethan's cramped second-floor apartment. The living room was our office, the kitchen, our break room, and the single bedroom was where we'd crash for a few hours when we couldn't keep our eyes open any longer. We recruited our first employees from our classes. Tyler Washington, a quiet genius who could build and manage server architecture in his sleep. Marcus Chun, a UX/UI designer obsessed with making technology feel human and intuitive. And Ethan's younger sister, Lisa Rodriguez, a natural-born salesperson with a radiant smile and a will of iron. She quit her job as a department store manager to become our one-woman sales, marketing, and business development team. She believed in us even when we barely believed in ourselves. Our budget was non-existent. We lived off a diet of bulk ramen, peanut butter, and the sheer, intoxicating thrill of creation. Every dollar we scraped together from our odd jobs went into server costs or buying secondhand equipment. We were a tiny, scrappy crew, a band of misfits united by a single crazy idea. The rejections were brutal. We created a slick pitch deck and started making the rounds to angel investors and venture capitalists in Chicago. It was a series of lessons in humiliation. We'd walk into gleaming boardrooms, looking like sleep-deprived students, and pitch our hearts out to men in expensive suits who would stare at us with bored, calculating eyes. "It's a clever idea, ladies," one particularly smug investor told us, tapping his gold pen on his desk. "But you're guppies swimming in a shark tank. Synth, Omnitech, they own the space. They have teams of hundreds of engineers, massive patents. What do you have?" "A better, more elegant solution," I said, my jaw tight. He smirked. "Ideas are cheap. Execution is everything. Come back when you have a paying customer." We walked out of that office, the silence between us heavy with defeat. We were burning through the little money we had. The pressure was immense. One night, after another particularly harsh rejection, the mood in the apartment was grim. "Maybe they're right," Tyler said quietly, staring at a screen full of code. "Maybe we're just fooling ourselves." "No," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Everyone looked at me. "They're wrong. They think this is a technology problem. It's not. It's a people problem. They're building systems for buildings. We're building systems for the people in the buildings. That's the difference." That night, I had an epiphany. "We're playing their game," I told the team the next morning. "The game of fundraising and pitch decks. We need to change the rules. Forget the investors. We're going to find a partner, one person who feels the pain we're trying to solve every single day. And we're going to give them our system for free." Ethan looked at me like I had just suggested setting our servers on fire. "Give it away, Olivia. We're 2 weeks from our electricity being shut off." "A free pilot program," I clarified, my mind racing. "One high-profile building. We prove it works. We get a rock-solid case study with real data, and then we have something to sell. We stop selling an idea and start selling a result." It was a massive gamble. We were betting the entire company on one roll of the dice. Lisa, our fearless sales chief, spent the next week on the phone. She was looking for a specific profile, a property manager of a large, older, but prestigious building. Someone known for being innovative, but who was fighting a losing battle against aging infrastructure and rising costs. She found Janet Chun. Janet managed the Chamberlain, a 50-story historic landmark in the heart of the Loop. It was a beautiful Art Deco masterpiece, but it was notoriously inefficient. We knew from public records that its energy costs were nearly double that of a modern building its size. Getting the meeting was a miracle. Convincing her was a battle. We sat in her polished office, the three of us looking like kids in the principal's office. Janet Chun was a formidable woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through our nervous enthusiasm. She listened to our entire pitch without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin. When we finished, a long silence hung in the air. Let me get this straight, she said finally, her voice dry. You want me to give 3 people with no track record and no funding complete access to the core operational systems of my $100 million building? Yes, I said. You want to install your untested software into my HVAC, my security, my electrical grid. That's the plan, Ethan chimed in, with a bit too much cheer. And what happens, she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, when your little experiment crashes, when it locks 3,000 people out of their offices on a Monday morning, or shuts down the heat in the middle of a Chicago blizzard? Who do I sue then? This was the moment, the make or break question. It won't crash, I said, my voice steady, filled with a certainty I didn't entirely feel. But if it does, we'll be here. We will physically live in your boiler room for the entire 3-month trial. We will not sleep. We will not leave. We will not let you fail. That's my promise. Janet Chun stared at me for a full minute. She wasn't looking at our technology anymore. She was looking at me. She was assessing my character, my resolve. She was a shrewd business person, and I think she recognized the one thing we had more of than any of our corporate competitors: pure, unadulterated desperation. We had no choice but to succeed. Fine, she said. So suddenly it took my breath away. You have 90 days. The first major glitch, the first serious tenant complaint, and you're out. And you will be hearing from my lawyer. Do we have an understanding? Crystal clear, I said, a grin finally breaking through my nervous facade. Those 90 days were a blur. We made good on my promise. We set up shop in a small, dusty storage room in the basement of the Chamberlain, right next to the boiler room. We lived and breathed that building. We mapped every circuit, learned every quirk of the ancient HVAC system, and memorized the security patrol routes. We weren't just installing software. We were performing open-heart surgery on a 50-story giant. The day we went live was terrifying. We gathered around our makeshift command center in the basement, watching the data streams on our monitors. For the first few hours, it was chaos. Alarms we didn't expect, data that didn't make sense. But then slowly, the AI began to learn. We saw it shut down the lights on 3 empty floors. We saw it adjust the airflow on the sunny side of the building. We saw it flag a small intermittent pressure drop in a water pipe on the 47th floor, a leak that was completely invisible, one that would have gone undetected for months until it caused a catastrophic failure. We were watching our creation come to life. At the end of the 90 days, Janet Chun summoned us to her office. She didn't smile. She just turned her computer monitor toward us. On the screen was a spreadsheet. Here's the data, she said, her tone all business. Energy consumption is down 43%. That's a net savings of over $60,000 for the quarter. Tenant complaints about temperature irregularities have dropped by 90%. And this, she pointed to a line item from her maintenance crew, is the report on that pipe on the 47th floor. They found a corroded joint exactly where your system indicated. The chief engineer estimates it would have failed within the next 6 months. A failure like that would have flooded 3 floors. The repair and water damage would have cost this building close to $250,000. Your system didn't just save me money, it saved me from a disaster. She finally leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. So, let's talk about a real contract. And I happen to be on the board of a National Property Management Association. I think there are a few people who need to hear about what you've done here. That was it. That was the breakthrough. Janet Chun became our champion. Her impeccable data and sterling recommendation were better than any venture capital funding. Within 6 months, we had contracts for 10 more buildings. Within a year, we were operating in 3 different cities. We finally moved into a real office, hired a real team, and started paying ourselves a real salary. I was so deep in the work, so obsessed with building and growing, that my old life felt like a distant dream. I was a ghost to my family, and I preferred it that way. When Michael called to tell me he was engaged to a lawyer named Sarah Parker, I was happy for him, but it felt like news from another country. I promised to be at the engagement dinner, never once imagining that the smart, successful lawyer my brother was marrying was a key player at the very company that was, at that exact moment, secretly preparing a 9-figure offer to buy my entire world. Walking out onto the magnificent mile that night was a surreal experience. The city was alive with light and motion, but I felt like I was moving through a dream. The cool Chicago air hit my face, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the restaurant. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't vengeful. I was just empty. The rage that had been my engine for so long had burned itself out in that final brutal confrontation, and in its place was a vast, quiet stillness. I had said everything that needed to be said. The truth was out, a wild animal uncaged, and I had no idea what it would do next. I didn't take a cab. I didn't go home. I just walked. I walked for hours with no destination in mind. I walked south through the canyons of the Loop, past the towering buildings that were the monuments of other people's success. Many of them would soon be running on my technology, their internal systems managed by the code I had written in a cramped apartment while the city slept. I was the ghost in the machine, and I had just revealed myself. Now what? My phone buzzed in my pocket, a persistent, annoying vibration against my leg. I pulled it out. A string of missed calls and texts. Michael. Olivia, I am so sorry. I had no idea. Please call me. Mom. Olivia, we need to talk. Please come back. This is a misunderstanding. Michael. I'm a complete idiot. I'm ashamed. Please just let me know you're okay. Mom. Your father is distraught. You've caused a terrible scene. That last one. You've caused a terrible scene. Even now, after everything, she was framing it as my fault. My truth was an inconvenience, a social faux pas. I stared at the message, a bitter smile touching my lips. Some things would never change. I turned the phone off and shoved it back in my pocket. I needed silence. A few days passed in a blur. I didn't leave my apartment. I ordered food in, watched movies, and tried to process the tectonic shift that had occurred in my life. On the third day, there was a knock on my door, a hesitant, uncertain knock, not the confident rap of a delivery driver. I looked through the peephole. It was my father. A jolt of the old anger went through me. I almost didn't open the door, but my curiosity, and perhaps a flicker of something else, won out. I unlatched the deadbolt and opened the door. He looked terrible. He was dressed in a simple sweater and slacks, not his usual impeccably tailored suit. He looked smaller, older. The unshakable authority he always projected was gone, replaced by a weary, hollowed-out look. His eyes were bloodshot. "Can I come in?" he asked. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual booming confidence. I hesitated for a beat, then stepped aside. He walked into my small, neat apartment, his eyes slowly taking everything in. He looked at the bookshelf, crammed with programming manuals and science fiction paperbacks. He looked at the massive whiteboard that covered one wall, still covered in the faded diagrams of our last project. He looked at the simple, functional furniture. This was the first time he had ever set foot in my world. "This is nice," he said, the words sounding hollow and awkward in the quiet room. We stood in silence for a long moment, the air thick with unspoken history. Finally, he turned to me, his gaze filled with a profound and painful confusion. "I don't understand your world, Olivia," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He sank onto my small couch as if his legs could no longer support him. "I've been trying for 3 days to wrap my head around it. 300 million is just a number. It doesn't compute. In my world, success is tangible. It's a degree on the wall. It's a published paper in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's a life you save on an operating table. What you do," he gestured vaguely at the whiteboard, "it's just lights and symbols on a screen to me." "It's more than that, Dad," I said quietly. "I know that now," he said, shaking his head, a gesture of deep weariness. "That man, David Chun, a man I've admired from afar for years. He looks at you like you hung the moon. And I looked at you and saw a girl playing games, wasting her potential." He looked down at his hands, the surgeon's hands that were his pride and his identity. "Your mother and I, we were wrong. What we did with those letters. There's no excuse. It was unforgivable. It was born out of fear. My fear." I waited, saying nothing, letting him find the words. "I had a friend in medical school," he began, his voice distant, traveling back in time. "His name was David. He was brilliant, a natural, top of our class. But he didn't want to be a doctor. He wanted to be a musician, a songwriter. His family, a long line of doctors, they disowned him, cut him off completely. I saw him 10 years later. He was playing a guitar for spare change on a street corner in San Francisco. He was broke. His wife had left him. His health was failing. He was a ghost. All that potential, all that brilliance, just gone, wasted. And I swore to myself I would never let that happen to my child. I thought I was protecting you from that. I thought your computer thing was the same as his guitar, a path to failure and disappointment. I was so terrified of you failing that I never gave you a chance to succeed. I tried to force you onto a path I understood, a path I knew was safe. It was the most vulnerable, honest thing he had ever said to me. It didn't erase the years of neglect. It didn't excuse the deliberate, cruel sabotage. It didn't undo the pain. But it was a reason. A flawed, selfish, terribly human reason. For the first time, I saw him not as the monolithic, tyrannical Dr. Johnson, but as a man blinded and crippled by his own fears. I appreciate you telling me that, I said. And to my own surprise, I meant it. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, he said quickly, holding up a hand. I know I don't deserve it. I wouldn't forgive me. I'm asking for a chance to understand. I want you to explain it to me. Your work, all of it from the beginning. I want to learn. It was a truce flag waved from across a battlefield of his own making. A part of me, the wounded 18-year-old girl who still lived inside me, wanted to sneer, wanted to say, "It's too late. You had your chance." But looking at the broken man on my couch, I realized that holding on to that anger would only keep me tethered to the past he had created. Vengeance was a prison, and I had just been set free. I wasn't going to walk back into another cell. "Okay, Dad," I said, pulling up a chair and sitting down opposite him. "Okay, it all started with an idea about buildings. That conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't magically heal a lifetime of wounds, but it was a start. It was the first tentative stone being laid on a long, uncertain road to something new. The power dynamic between us had shifted forever. I no longer needed anything from him. But for the first time in his life, he was asking for something from me, a chance to see his daughter for who she really was. And a year after the acquisition, I stood on the balcony of my apartment. It was the same breathtaking view I'd seen from the restaurant, but it felt entirely different now. It was no longer a symbol of a world I was excluded from, a world I could only look at through glass. It was just my city, my home. The lights of the buildings twinkled below, a vast, interconnected network, a living system pulsing with energy. And I knew, with a quiet, bone-deep sense of peace, that I had helped build a small part of its nervous system. I was no longer a ghost. I was part of the architecture. My relationship with my family had found a new, fragile equilibrium. We started a tradition of monthly dinners, not at fancy, soulless restaurants, but at my apartment or my parents' house. They were often still a little awkward, full of hesitant questions and careful answers, but they were honest. My father would ask me about my work with the foundation, and he would actually listen, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to understand the world of venture philanthropy. My mother, to my unending surprise, had started volunteering her legal expertise to help nonprofits. A world away from her usual corporate clients, she was, in her own way, trying to find a purpose beyond a paycheck. Sarah and Michael got married in a beautiful ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. I stood beside my brother as his best woman. In his speech, he didn't tell embarrassing childhood stories. He talked about the future. He talked about learning from his older sister that the most successful paths in life are not the ones that are laid out for you, but the ones you have the courage to build yourself, brick by painful brick. He looked at me as he said it, his eyes filled with a respect that was more valuable than any inheritance. My parents, sitting in the front row, applauded, their faces a complex mixture of pride and a lingering quiet sorrow for all the years they had lost. That night on the balcony, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was a picture from Michael. It showed him and my dad standing in a hospital lab. They were side by side, both in scrubs, grinning at the camera and pointing at a large monitor displaying a complex 3D image of a human brain. The text underneath read, "The new surgical imaging software uses a machine learning algorithm to predict tumor margins. It made me think of you. Pretty amazing stuff. Proud of you, sis." A real, uncomplicated smile spread across my face. That was it. That was the validation I had unknowingly craved for a lifetime. It didn't come in a 9-figure bank transfer. It didn't come from a magazine cover. It came in a simple text message from my brother, a shared moment of nerdy enthusiasm, a connection between his world and mine. It wasn't about forgiveness. Not completely. You don't just forget the scars. They are a part of you, a map of where you've been. But you can learn to live with them. You can let them be a reminder not of the pain, but of your own strength to heal. The gnawing need for their approval, the burning anger that had fueled me for so long, the deep-seated feeling of being less than, it was all gone, washed away. I wasn't the weird computer nerd in the bedroom. I wasn't the $300 million CEO on a magazine. I was just Olivia. And for the first time in my entire life, standing there under the vast starry sky, that felt like enough, felt like everything. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It's a strange and often painful journey, figuring out who you are when the people closest to you have a completely different picture in their heads. It's a battle to have your own truth seen and respected. Have you ever felt like you had to fight to be seen for who you truly are? Or maybe you were the one who had trouble seeing someone else's true potential. Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.